Thank you very much for having me. My name is Levi Browde. I'm the Executive Director for the Falun Dafa Information Center. We're a nonprofit that works on exposing the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China and looking at the transnational repression of Falun Gong diaspora against the diaspora all around the world. A little background. Falun Gong is a Buddhist-based spiritual practice whose roots go back millennia in Chinese spiritual traditions. But it was only first made public in 1992, and throughout the 1990s became very popular, upwards of 100 million people practicing in China. And at that time, that constitutes 1 out of every 13 people in the country. So it was a very different time then, very beloved. Even that state-run media in China was praising Falun Gong for health benefits and things like that. The top leader in 1999 recognized, among other things, that this was far more popular than the Communist Party, and he single-handedly ordered that the group be eradicated. There was actually a significant power struggle in the summer of '99. He prevailed. And so for the last 26 years, we've had the persecution of Falun Gong, which at this point has constituted millions detained in one form or another. Torture is rampant, death by torture is rampant, and of course the horrific crime of forced organ harvesting really arose out of the Falun Gong practitioner community, and now Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other groups are victims. But that is the practice, the horrific practice of taking a detainee, a prisoner of conscience, screening them, killing them for their organs, and using those organs in transplant operation, which is now a multi-billion-dollar industry in China. So that's sort of the landscape of what the persecution looks like in Falun Gong. Now, if you look at the technology side, the persecution of Falun Gong has really spanned the rise of technology in China to persecute people. Primarily, Golden Shield, the Great Firewall, Skynet, these mechanisms for censoring, for surveilling, for correlating with databases of the identification cards, and using actual cameras and these types of technologies to identify where people are, pick them up, detain them, which eventually, of course in Falun Gong's case, leads to torture and so forth. So these kinds of technologies are now ubiquitous. And we're seeing, in recent years, we've seen an escalation in group arrests in China because they've been able to determine when a group of Falun Gong practitioners are together. And recently we had an 87-year-old grandmother from Shandong province who was arrested because of facial recognition, and it picked out that she had a thumbnail drive in her pocket, which they suspected had circumnavigation software to get out of the Great Firewall. So this technology has been really a driving force in persecuting peoples inside China, and certainly Falun Gong. Now, pivoting to outside, there's an important technology question outside China. The Falun Gong diaspora is significant. It's 100 countries. Out of Falun Gong community has arisen human rights groups, media companies, performing arts companies. You probably all know, have seen the Shenyun posters that was started by Falun Gong practitioners to show the true culture of China, show the tyranny of the CCP on the world stage. These are primary targets of transnational oppression, and here's where some of the technology questions get very thorny and difficult. And I'll give you a high-level case study. A couple of years ago, Beijing, noticing how popular Shenyun was, orchestrated, with the help of some Beijing-backed YouTubers, a couple of people to formulate a lot of accusations against Shenyun. That was packaged in a lawsuit. It was packaged in a way that baited some media, and a lot of newspaper articles came out of that. What happened next is informative. On platform X last year, they found that one of these articles going after Shenyun was the most shared article of all on the X platform. They found that strange. X investigated and found that this was happening because thousands of China-linked fake accounts were the ones sharing this article. Then you saw on YouTube, suddenly a lot of videos that were all making the same points, the same substance, going after Shenyun, going after the Falun Gong community. And some of them, like you might recognize this guy, Tim Pool, YouTuber, some of them come forward and said openly, we have been approached by Chinese officials and offered money to do this kind of thing. So this was sort of explaining, this was a mechanism to frame a narrative and intimidate the Falun Gong community and their supporters outside China. It was initially seeded with these lies, but it was really driven by technology. And there's also some serious questions about these search results that you sort of see in Google. If you compare that to some of the results you're seeing in some of the AI models, there's clearly a discrepancy that would indicate some sort of human interaction is skewing those results. So all of this, we have a report here you can get at the back of the room that we just published. or the initial findings were just published. This is a survey we took of the Falun Gong community throughout America, over 1,000 respondents. And what we're seeing is an impact on the community here of being intimidated, surveilled, and having a lot of the difficulty that even in the early days of the persecution in China is sort of similar. And so it's had a real impact on the diaspora community. And again, this is really driven a lot by the technology that they're putting behind, amplifying and skewing these stories in America and across the West. So I'll leave it at that. Some thoughts on solutions and how we address that, but we will do that in the QA portion. Thank you.
Levi, we'll shift to you now. How do you address challenges posed by technology? You speak about it a bit in your intro. Expand on some solutions.
Sure. I think it all centers, a lot of it centers around transparency. For a very good reason, we have the FARA laws here in this country when it comes to lobbyists. Anybody could shape public policy. Well, what shapes public policy more than lobbyists? The media, including social media. And yet, these kind of transparency measures are not in place for media. We've got, some of our main media companies have tens of millions of dollars of deals inside China. They have personal staff with personal business and other ties to Communist China. There are meetings with Communist China. None of that is revealed. We need FARA-like regulations that would govern not only our media institutions, again, they enjoy extra protection when it comes before law enforcement because of First Amendment issues, which they should. But I think that brings with it an extra burden. I think we can bring FARA-type policy to media and social media. Social media especially because they're protected from Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. They're not going to be sued for any of their types of content. And yet, I know YouTubers that are just criticizing the Chinese Communist Party and for that get demonetized. And they just get sort of this general blanket, oh, you violated the conduct rules on the platform. No specificity. There needs to be transparency about exactly why you're taking down videos that criticize the Chinese Communist Party on YouTube. That should be spelled out clearly. The other two things I would say real quickly is, one, we need to support groups that are engineering and getting successfully to adopt inside China and other countries like that, tools that will circumnavigate the Great Firewall and do so safely. Falun Gong engineers have created a lot of this software, other groups have created this software. It's about bandwidth and it's about getting the adoption inside the home country, and we need to support that. And the last thing I would say is, and this is the toughest one I think of all, you know, for the last 2 years there have been a slate of, we call them bomb threats, they're really terrorist threats, largely through email, though some through websites, targeting Shen Reforming Arts, targeting Falun Gong, targeting the American government, who is supportive of Falun Gong, with essentially terrorist attacks. A lot of it is done through bouncing through servers, VPNs, other technologies, so it's very hard to track them down. I think we need to crack that nut. You can't go into a theater and yell fire, right? That is an exception to our free speech. There needs to be a way that we can track down some of these essentially terrorist threats, especially when they're coming from a foreign power like China. Taiwanese authorities actually trace these bomb threats back to China, so we know that's where they're coming from. We need better ability to stop these kind of threats going over our internet communication systems and targeting communities here in the US and around the world. So.
Thank you, Levi. Okay, Bill.